The saloon was alive with noise and tension, the clinking of glasses, the shuffle of cards, and the murmurs of men as they talked, laughed, and argued. It was a dusty place like many others in the small frontier town, but tonight, it was a little different. There was a nervous energy in the air, something that made even the rowdiest of the gamblers lower their voices. The stakes were high, and the game about to begin was unlike any other. Jack "Whiskey" Malone was a man known for his bad luck, but tonight was different. As he walked into the saloon, he was drunk, his steps unsteady, his hat low over his eyes. He had been drinking for hours, and his head was already spinning. But none of that mattered. Tonight he was here for one thing, the poker game. Jack had never been a good man, but he was good at cards. He knew how to bluff, how to read the other players, and how to win. And tonight, he was determined to do just that. The table was already set up. A dozen or so rough-looking men gathered around it, all waiting for the game to begin. They eyed Jack as he staggered toward them, his boots scraping the wooden floor with each step. But Jack didn't care about their looks. He just wanted to win. That's all he cared about. "Come on, Whiskey," one of the men said with a smirk. "You've had too much to drink already. You sure you want to play?" Jack grinned, a crooked smile that only added to his reputation. "What's the matter, Johnny? Afraid I might actually win for once?" The man laughed, but Jack's eyes were focused, the sharpness he needed slowly starting to break through the fog of his drunkenness. He had been losing lately, and it had been eating at him. This game, this moment, was his chance to turn things around. He needed the money, and he needed the victory. There was no turning back now. As the cards were dealt, Jack took his seat and quickly scanned the room. His eyes flicked from player to player, sizing them up. None of them were familiar to him, but there was something about this particular group that made him uneasy. These weren't the usual small-time gamblers. These were men who had something to lose. But Jack didn't care about that. His mind was already set on the prize, the money, and the girl. Jack's attention shifted to the man sitting across from him. Mr. Lee was an older man, his face wrinkled but proud. He was dressed in fine clothes, clearly not from around here. Jack didn't know much about him, but he had heard the rumors. Mr. Lee had come to town with his daughter, a young woman who had caught the attention of more than a few men. It wasn't long before Jack had learned the real reason Mr. Lee was in town. "Let's raise the stakes, gentlemen," Mr. Lee said, his voice smooth and calm. "I'm willing to bet something more valuable than money." The table fell silent. Jack narrowed his eyes, trying to figure out what Mr. Lee was up to. "I'll bet my daughter," Mr. Lee continued, his words calm but heavy. "If anyone wins this game, they will win her hand in marriage. I have no use for her in this town. You all know that she is promised to no one, but the one who wins will have her." The room went still. Jack felt his pulse quicken. A woman. He had heard the rumors, but he hadn't believed them. This wasn't the kind of game where people played for women, but the stakes had just gotten much higher. "I'll take that bet," Jack said without hesitation. His voice was steady, and the alcohol seemed to lose its hold on him for a moment. There was something about the challenge that sparked his attention. He hadn't expected it, but he couldn't back out now. The prize was too tempting. Mr. Lee didn't flinch. He simply nodded, and the game resumed. The cards flew across the table, the game moving faster now. Jack's focus was sharper than ever. He didn't care about the money anymore. All he could think about was the woman, Mei Ling. He had seen her once, briefly, standing beside her father when they had first entered the saloon. She was beautiful, calm, and quiet, with dark eyes that seemed to see right through him. Jack had felt a strange pull toward her then, but he hadn't dared speak to her. Now, though, his thoughts were consumed with the idea of winning her, of having her. As the rounds went on, Jack's confidence grew. His hand was strong, and he could tell the others were starting to sweat. He played his cards expertly, bluffing when necessary and watching the other men closely. But as the game reached its final round, Jack's confidence began to waver. He was still drunk, and the weight of the bet was starting to settle in. Mr. Lee was a careful player, his face unreadable. Jack couldn't get a read on him. Every time Jack thought he had the upper hand, Mr. Lee would counter with a calm smile and a winning hand. But Jack wasn't about to back down. He had to win. For the first time in years, he felt something besides the usual anger and frustration. He felt something else, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The final hand was dealt. Jack's heart raced as he looked at his cards. He could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy. The other players were quiet now, all of them watching, waiting. Jack glanced across the table at Mei Ling. She was standing quietly by her father's side, her eyes fixed on him. Jack felt his breath catch in his throat. He had to win. He had to prove that he was good for something, that he was worth something. For a moment, everything else faded away, and all that mattered was the game, the cards, and the woman standing before him. The betting began. Jack's hands shook slightly, but his resolve was stronger than ever. He pushed his chips into the center of the table, his eyes locked on Mr. Lee's. The man's face remained calm, but Jack could see the slightest hint of doubt in his eyes. The final round arrived. Jack looked at his hand and then at Mr. Lee. He knew it was time to make his move. He raised the bet again, his heart pounding in his chest. There was no turning back now. Mr. Lee hesitated for a moment, then finally called. The tension in the room was palpable. The cards were revealed, and Jack's heart sank when he saw the hand that Mr. Lee had. But to everyone's surprise, Jack won. His hand was stronger. The room erupted in gasps of disbelief. Jack sat back, his mind reeling. He had won. He had won her. Mei Ling stood there, her face a mask of calm, and for a moment Jack didn't know what to say. He had never been good with women, and he wasn't sure what he was supposed to do now. But his thoughts were interrupted when Mei Ling spoke, her voice soft and calm. "Your mother," she said, her words floating across the room like a whisper. "Before she died, she told me to forgive you." Jack froze, his eyes wide with shock. The alcohol in his system seemed to vanish in an instant. The world around him fell away, and for the first time in years he was sober. Completely sober. The words Mei Ling had spoken struck him deep. His mother's voice, long gone, echoed in his mind. Jack sat still, staring at Mei Ling, his mind racing. He had won, and yet something didn't feel right. The words she had just spoken echoed in his ears. "Your mother, before she died, she told me to forgive you." Her voice was soft, almost like a whisper, but they cut through him like a knife. How could she know that? How could she possibly know about his mother? About the pain he carried with him for so long? His mother had been a kind woman, loving and full of hope, but Jack had shattered all of her dreams with his reckless ways. She had begged him to stop drinking, to stop gambling, to stop living the life of a criminal, but Jack hadn't listened. He had kept running, kept falling deeper into the life he had chosen, and in the end his mother had died alone, her heart broken by the son who couldn't change now. Here was Mei Ling, a woman he had just won in a poker game, telling him words that no one else had ever dared to speak. She didn't know him. She didn't know his past, his pain, his failures, and yet she was telling him to forgive himself as if it were that easy, as if it could be fixed with a few simple words. He looked down at the cards in his hand, still in disbelief. It was as if the whole world had shifted beneath him. His mother's words, spoken through Mei Ling, filled him with a strange mix of guilt and something else. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't beyond redemption. Maybe he could change. Maybe he could be the man his mother had always wanted him to be. But how? How could he just erase the years of mistakes? The years of running away from his own conscience? He wasn't sure what to do, what to say. The room felt suddenly too small, too suffocating. The other men at the poker table had gone quiet, watching him closely, waiting for his next move. Jack could feel their eyes on him, but his attention was focused entirely on Mei Ling. She stood there, her posture calm and composed, but her eyes told a different story. There was something in her gaze, a quiet strength, a kind of understanding that Jack couldn't fully comprehend. It was as if she knew something about him, something deep down that he had long tried to bury. "Why did you say that?" Jack finally asked, his voice thick with emotion. "How did you know?" Mei Ling didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at him, her expression softening. "My father. He knew you. He spoke of you before." Her voice was low, almost hesitant. "He told me that you once had a good heart, that you had a chance to change." Jack's heart clenched. He had heard rumors about Mr. Lee, the man who had brought Mei Ling to town, but he hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected Mei Ling's words to touch something inside him, something he had buried so deep he had forgotten it was even there. His mother, Mr. Lee, and now Mei Ling. 3 people, all from different parts of his life, all reminding him of the same thing. That he had a choice. That he could change. I don't know what to do," Jack admitted, his voice raw. He had never been good at expressing his feelings, never been good at opening up to anyone. But something about Mei Ling made him feel as though he could trust her, as though she might be the key to finding a way out of the darkness he had been living in for so long. Mei Ling took a small step closer to him, her gaze steady. "You don't have to do anything right now," she said softly. "You don't have to change all at once, but you have to start somewhere." Jack looked at her, his eyes searching her face for any sign of mockery or anger, but all he saw was kindness and understanding. He felt a lump form in his throat. She was offering him something he had never asked for: hope. The kind of hope he had thought was long gone. "I don't know how to be a good man," Jack said, his voice almost a whisper. "I've spent so many years ruining everything. I don't know how to fix it." Mei Ling's gaze softened even further. "Maybe you don't have to fix everything. Maybe you just have to start by being kind, to yourself and to others." She paused, her words carefully chosen. "You won the game, Jack, but there's more to life than winning." Jack didn't respond right away. He simply stood there, taking in her words. He hadn't expected this, hadn't expected to hear something that made so much sense. He had spent so much of his life thinking that he had to keep fighting, that he had to win at any cost. But now, standing in front of this woman, he realized that there was another way. A way that didn't involve running from his past or drowning his feelings in alcohol. A way that involved facing the truth no matter how painful it was. Mei Ling's words lingered in his mind as he stepped away from the poker table. He needed to think. He needed to process everything that had happened, everything he had learned in just a few short minutes. He had won her, yes, but the real victory wasn't in the cards or the money. It was in the chance she had given him to change. For the first time in years, Jack felt something other than anger or shame. It was as though Mei Ling had opened a door he had long kept locked, a door to a future he hadn't dared to imagine. A future where he could be a better man, a man worthy of respect, a man who didn't have to hide behind whiskey or lies. But before he could say anything more, the saloon door swung open, and the air outside rushed in, cool and sharp. Jack's thoughts were interrupted by the noise of the world outside, but inside something had shifted. The weight of the past, the years of mistakes and regret didn't seem so heavy anymore. Mei Ling stood silently watching him, as if she knew exactly what was going on inside his head. And in that moment, Jack knew that he wasn't alone. Maybe, just maybe, he could find his way out of the darkness. Jack paced back and forth in his small, dimly lit cabin, his thoughts running wild. The words Mei Ling had spoken kept echoing in his mind, and he couldn't escape them. "Your mother, before she died, she told me to forgive you." How could she know that? It didn't make sense. He had kept his past buried so deep, hidden behind layers of whiskey, gambling, and anger. How could Mei Ling, a woman he had only just met, know something so personal? And yet, there she was, speaking with a calmness that made the weight of those words feel even heavier. He stopped pacing and ran a hand through his unkempt hair, staring out the small window that looked out over the wild, empty landscape. The wind blew dust across the ground and the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the land. Jack's life had always been like this, lonely, empty, and full of regret. He had made so many mistakes, hurt so many people, but it had never seemed to matter. He had always believed that there was no way back, no redemption for a man like him. But Mei Ling's words had shaken something deep inside him. It was as if a small crack had appeared in the wall he had built around his heart, and now the light was beginning to seep through. Jack had spent years running from his past, using alcohol and gambling to drown out the memories of his mother's disappointment and the guilt that weighed on him. She had always believed in him, even when he didn't believe in himself. She had told him that he could be better, that he had the potential to change. But Jack had never listened. Instead, he had chosen the life of an outlaw, convinced that there was no place for someone like him in the world. His mother had died alone, just a few years before he'd come to this town. She had been sick for a long time, and Jack hadn't been there. He had been too busy with his own self-destructive behavior to care, and by the time he had returned, it was too late. She was gone. Her death had hit him harder than he had let on, but he had never allowed himself to grieve. Instead, he had thrown himself deeper into his vices, convincing himself that he deserved the pain. But now, Mei Ling's words were forcing him to confront something he had been avoiding for years, the fact that he wasn't beyond saving. He had always told himself that he didn't deserve redemption, that he had crossed too many lines, hurt too many people, and ruined too many chances. But Mei Ling, a woman who had no reason to be kind to him, had given him something he didn't know he wanted. Hope. Jack leaned against the rough wooden wall of his cabin, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. He could still hear Mei Ling's voice in his mind, soft but firm, telling him to be kind to himself, to start fresh. It was as if she had unlocked something inside him, something he had buried deep for years. Maybe he didn't have to keep running. Maybe he didn't have to keep punishing himself for the mistakes of his past. Maybe there was a chance to be the man his mother had always hoped he could be. But how could he start? Where could he even begin? He wasn't sure, but he knew one thing. He couldn't stay the same. Not after everything he had learned in just a few hours. He couldn't keep pretending that the choices he had made didn't matter. Mei Ling had shown him that there was another way, a way to live with honor and dignity, even if it meant facing the pain he had been avoiding for so long. Jack stood up straighter, his jaw clenched with determination. He had to do something. He couldn't just sit here and wait for life to change. He had to take action. The thought terrified him, but it also filled him with a strange sense of purpose. For the first time in years, he felt alive, like something inside him had sparked back to life. The thought of redemption, of turning his life around, seemed impossible, but it was no longer a dream. It was something real, something he could work toward. As Jack stood there lost in thought, he heard the soft creak of the cabin door. Mei Ling stepped inside, her presence calm but unwavering. She was as quiet as ever, but there was a new sense of familiarity between them. She had given him the space to think, to process everything that had happened, and now she was here, offering him something that Jack didn't know how to name. Support. "Are you all right?" Mei Ling asked, her voice soft but full of concern. Jack turned to face her, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never been good at expressing his emotions, never been able to talk about the things that haunted him. But something about Mei Ling made him want to try. He didn't want to hide anymore. "I don't know," Jack admitted, his voice rough. "I don't know what to do with all of this. I don't know how to be the man you think I can be." Mei Ling stepped closer, her eyes steady on his. "You don't have to have all the answers right now, Jack. You just have to take one step forward. Start with today, with this moment, and then take another step tomorrow." Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of years of wisdom. Jack felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. He had never known someone like her, someone who believed in him when he didn't believe in himself. She wasn't here to judge him or to condemn him for his past. She was simply offering him a chance to change, a chance to be better. "I don't know if I can," Jack said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've hurt so many people. I don't know if I can make it right." "You don't have to fix everything all at once," Mei Ling said gently. "Start with small things, with the people around you, and most importantly, with yourself." Jack felt something shift inside him, a small but significant change. Mei Ling was right. He didn't have to fix everything today. He didn't have to erase the past. But he could start by being a better man, by taking responsibility for the choices he made. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in years, Jack felt ready to try. He looked at Mei Ling, his heart full of gratitude. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know if I deserve your kindness, but I'm going to try. I'll try to be better." Mei Ling smiled, a soft, knowing smile. "You already are, Jack. You just have to believe it." As she turned to leave, Jack stood there for a moment, absorbing her words. The future was uncertain, and the road ahead was long. But for the first time in a long time, Jack felt a spark of hope. He didn't know where this path would lead, but he knew one thing. He wasn't alone anymore. And that, for now, was enough. The days that followed were not easy for Jack. The weight of Mei Ling's words still pressed on him. But now, there was a sense of determination in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the usual reckless determination to win or conquer. It was something different, something quieter but much stronger. It was the determination to change, to finally face the consequences of his past and begin building something better, something worthy of the woman who had shown him kindness. At first, the change was slow. Jack woke up each day with a knot in his stomach, unsure of where to begin. But each morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, he forced himself to get out of bed, to start moving, even when the weight of guilt and regret threatened to pull him back under. He had to stop running. It was the only way forward. He started by taking small steps, helping around the ranch, doing the work that needed to be done, even when it felt like he was still walking through a fog. He tried to be kind to Mei Ling, tried to speak to her with respect, but it was harder than he had anticipated. His past had taught him to be selfish, to take what he wanted, to never show vulnerability. But Mei Ling's presence, calm and steady, was a constant reminder of what he could become if he allowed himself to let go of his past. One morning, Jack found himself standing beside Mei Ling as they worked together in the barn. The air was cool, the smell of hay and fresh earth filling the space between them. Jack was repairing a fence, his hands moving mechanically as he tried to focus on the task at hand. Mei Ling was beside him, gathering tools and handing them to him as he worked. She didn't say much, but her silence was comfortable, not awkward. It was a strange feeling for Jack, being around someone who didn't expect anything from him, someone who wasn't judging him for his past. It made him feel vulnerable in a way he wasn't used to, but it also made him feel human. "Thank you," Jack said, his voice rough as he handed her a hammer. It was the first time in a long time that he had expressed gratitude for anything, let alone for someone's help. He looked at her, unsure if the words were enough to convey what he felt, but Mei Ling simply nodded. "Of course," she replied softly, her eyes meeting his for a brief moment. "We worked together." The simplicity of the words made something stir inside Jack. It wasn't about him anymore. It wasn't about what he deserved or what he had lost. It was about the present, about the life they were building together step by step. He hadn't realized how much he had missed working alongside someone, how much he had craved companionship without judgment. With Mei Ling, there were no expectations, only quiet understanding. Over time, Jack began to settle into a routine. He would wake up early, work hard through the day, and in the evenings he would spend time with Mei Ling, talking about everything and nothing. The conversations were simple at first, about the weather, the ranch, and the small daily tasks that made up their world. But slowly, the walls Jack had built around himself started to come down. He found himself sharing more about his past, about the choices he had made, and about the pain he had carried for so long. It wasn't easy and it wasn't always pretty, but Mei Ling listened without judgment, without interruption. She allowed him to speak, to get the words out that he had kept bottled up for years. One night, as they sat by the fire outside, Jack found himself telling her about his mother. He hadn't spoken about her in so long, and the words came slowly at first, as though they were buried under years of guilt. But as he spoke, something inside him began to heal. Mei Ling's quiet presence beside him gave him the strength to continue, to face the parts of himself he had tried to forget. "My mother," Jack said, staring into the fire. "She was the only one who ever believed in me. She always said I could be better, but I didn't listen. I thought she was just trying to make me feel better. I didn't know how to change, and I didn't care." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "She died alone in that small house of ours, and I wasn't there. I should have been, but I was too drunk, too wrapped up in myself. And by the time I came back, it was too late." The fire crackled between them, and Jack fell silent, the weight of his confession hanging in the air. He didn't look at Mei Ling, afraid of what he might see in her eyes. But then he felt her hand on his arm, warm and steady. "You couldn't know, Jack," Mei Ling said gently, her voice soothing like a balm to his soul. "You couldn't have known. But you're here now. That's what matters." Jack's chest tightened. Her words were simple, but they were the truth. He couldn't change the past, but he could change the man he was today. He didn't need to be perfect, and he didn't need to fix everything at once. All he had to do was try. In the days that followed, Jack's efforts to change didn't go unnoticed. The other men in the town, the ones who had once written him off as just another lost cause, began to take notice. Jack was working harder than ever, his attitude shifting, and his reputation slowly started to improve. It wasn't a complete turnaround, but it was a start. And for Jack, that was enough. Mei Ling, too, had begun to change. There was a softness in her that hadn't been there before, a gentleness that seemed to mirror Jack's own transformation. She was no longer the quiet, distant woman who had been brought here against her will. She had found a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose, and she had begun to trust Jack in ways that she hadn't before. They were building something together, something strong and unspoken but real. A partnership that wasn't based on chance or force, but on mutual respect. One evening, as they stood together under the wide, open sky, Jack looked at Mei Ling and realized something that hit him with unexpected force. He had come to care for her in a way he hadn't expected. She wasn't just the woman he had won in a poker game anymore. She was a part of his life, a part of his future. "I don't know what the future holds," Jack said, his voice low but full of conviction. "But I know I don't want to face it without you." Mei Ling's eyes softened and she gave him a small smile. "I feel the same," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. For Jack, those words meant more than he could say. He had finally started to believe that he was worthy of something good, worthy of love and forgiveness. And for the first time in his life, he didn't feel so alone. Days turned into weeks, and as time passed, Jack felt something inside him begin to shift in ways he had never expected. He had spent years running from the man he was, hiding behind his mistakes and numbing the pain with alcohol. But Mei Ling's presence, her quiet strength, and her unwavering belief in him had started to change all of that. The weight of his past still lingered, but it didn't have the same hold on him anymore. With every passing day, he felt a little lighter, a little more like the man he had once dreamed of being. The ranch had become a place of calm for Jack. The work was hard, but it was honest, and for the first time in his life, he took pride in it. His hands, calloused and scarred from years of hard labor, were now building something solid, something real. It wasn't just the land he was tending to. It was his soul, piece by piece. And he was beginning to feel more at peace with himself. Mei Ling was by his side every step of the way, her quiet presence a constant reminder of the life they were building together. She never asked for anything, never demanded his time or attention. But she was there when he needed her, a steady and calming influence in his otherwise chaotic world. Jack found himself looking forward to their time together, whether they were working side by side in the fields or sitting together by the fire at night, simply enjoying each other's company. One evening, as they sat outside under the vast, starry sky, Jack turned to Mei Ling, his heart full of gratitude. The night was cool, the breeze gentle, and the fire crackled softly in front of them. It was a moment of peace, the kind of peace Jack had longed for but never knew he could find. He looked at Mei Ling, his eyes filled with a sense of wonder. "I never thought I'd be here," Jack said softly, his voice carrying the weight of everything he had been through. "I never thought I'd have a chance to be someone better, but here I am. With you." Mei Ling smiled, her eyes warm and understanding. "You're already better, Jack. You've come a long way." Jack shook his head, a small laugh escaping his lips. "I've got a long way to go, Mei Ling. I still have a lot to make up for." "You don't have to make up for everything," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "You're trying. That's what matters." Jack felt a lump form in his throat. He had spent so long thinking that he had to fix everything at once, that he had to erase his past to move forward. But Mei Ling had shown him a different way. She had shown him that change didn't happen overnight. It wasn't about perfection. It was about progress. It was about the small, everyday choices to be better, to be kinder, and to make amends where possible. "I've hurt a lot of people in my life," Jack continued, his voice thick with emotion, "but I don't want to hurt anyone anymore. I want to be someone who does good, who helps others, and I want to do that with you." Mei Ling reached out and took his hand in hers, her touch steady and reassuring. "You don't have to do it alone, Jack. I'm here." Those simple words, spoken with such sincerity, filled Jack with a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. He wasn't alone anymore. He had Mei Ling by his side, and that made all the difference. Together, they could face whatever came their way. Over the next few weeks, Jack worked even harder. The ranch was thriving, and so was his relationship with Mei Ling. They were no longer just two people living in the same place. They were partners building something together. Jack began to feel a sense of purpose that had been missing from his life for so long. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living. One day, after a long day of work, Jack stood at the edge of the ranch, looking out at the land he had come to call home. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden light over everything. Mei Ling stood beside him, her hand in his, and for the first time in his life, Jack felt a deep sense of contentment. It wasn't just the work or the land. It was the life he had built, the life he was sharing with her. It was the future that stretched before them, a future he had once thought was impossible. "I'm glad we're here," Jack said quietly, his voice full of emotion. "I'm glad it's with you." Mei Ling squeezed his hand, her eyes soft. "I'm glad too," Jack's heart swelled with something he hadn't felt in years: hope. It wasn't the kind of hope that came from dreams of grand victories or fleeting moments of success. It was a quiet, steady hope, the kind that grew from the ground up like the crops they were growing on the land. It was a hope that came from the simple, everyday moments that made life worth living. As the days passed, Jack's transformation became more and more apparent to the people around him. The town, which had once whispered about him behind his back, began to see the change in him. The rough edges, the anger, the bitterness, they were still there, but they weren't as sharp as they used to be. Jack was becoming someone else, someone he could respect. And as he looked at the life he was building with Mei Ling, he realized that he was finally becoming the man he had always wanted to be. One evening, as they sat together by the fire, Jack looked at Mei Ling and realized that the moment he had feared, the moment when he would have to ask her about her future, had finally arrived. He had spent so many years running from his feelings, afraid of what it would mean to care for someone, to love someone, but now he knew. He had to ask her. "Mei Ling," Jack began, his voice nervous but steady, "I know this might seem sudden, but I can't imagine my life without you. I don't want to. You've made me a better man, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" The world seemed to hold its breath as Jack waited for her answer. His heart was pounding in his chest, and he felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, unsure of what would come next. But then Mei Ling smiled, her eyes warm and full of love. "Yes," she said simply, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Yes, Jack, I will." Jack's heart soared. He had never been so sure of anything in his life. He had found the love he had always longed for, and now, with Mei Ling by his side, he knew that anything was possible. Together they had overcome so much, and there was no doubt in his mind that they would continue to build a future full of love, hope, and second chances. As they sat there, side by side, the fire crackling between them, Jack realized that this was just the beginning. The road ahead might still have its challenges, but for the first time in years, Jack felt ready to face it. With Mei Ling by his side, he knew he could overcome anything.